The Baldwin County Public School System, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensaw in 1799. At that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. However, in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County Public School System boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. As time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original public schoolhouses which distinguished, beginning in 1799, Baldwin County as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama. The old Loxley School, located on Chicago Street and originally constructed in 1927, served grades kindergarten through 6th, with the original structure containing 6 classrooms, an auditorium, office, bathrooms, lavatories, and a drinking fountain in each room. The cafeteria was added in 1950, and in 1997, new construction provided the students 21 classrooms, a computer lab, library, and gym. But that is far from the complete history of education in Loxley. As early as 1908, a one-room school was operating a mile west of the present facility. In 1911, a two-room school was built across the highway from the building now in operation. Growth in pupil numbers triggered the relocation of this building to its present location and the addition of one room in 1917. As the school became more crowded, a room in the Episcopal Church and one in the old Creamery building were also used as classrooms. After only 11 years, Loxley boasted 3 teachers, 107 students, and maintained classes through 10th grade. In 1977, a new junior high facility was constructed on County Road 49 to house grades 7 through 9. At that point, the former junior high building became Loxley Elementary School. Nevertheless, by 1995, the need to more efficiently serve a larger area resulted in a consolidation effort to create Central Baldwin Middle School. Junior high students have since attended Central Baldwin, while Loxley Elementary continues to provide a quality education for grades 1 through 3, with the former junior high hosting grades 4 through 5.
Loxley Junior High School, I taught there for a year and a half before World War II, taught 6th grade, and in the closing days of my second year, I taught 7th and 8th grades. Loxley School building was one of the ones that I would call a standard school. Back in 1926, back during the Bibb Graves administration, we had one of the biggest bond issues that have ever been issued in the state of Alabama. Maybe it wasn't big in terms of money, but in terms of what it bought in those days, it was tremendous. It changed the wood frame structures of schools in Alabama to masonry structures. A prominent architect by the name of Fred Lockhart designed a school plan that could be extended and enlarged, and every county that could build one could order a school plan to fit its needs. Architects in present days argue that you can't do that, but they did. Present day architects argue that you have to site the build, you have to fit the building to the site, and you do. But in the old days, we did it without paying much attention to the site. But it's a question of you pay now or you pay later. So we paid later when we had to revamp the shape of our campuses to make them drain, for instance, out between the wings of these buildings. If you wanted a junior high school such as Loxley, you would order a 9 figure, which referred to the number of classrooms. If you wanted an auditorium, you added an A to that. If you wanted indoor restrooms, you put an R after that. Otherwise, what they gave you would be just a little unfinished area in the school, and plans for the building of outdoor privies. If you wanted a school, say the size of Robertsdale, which was a senior high school, and you got on up in classrooms, then the auditorium that you would get on that plan would be bigger by 1 bay. A bay meaning a set of windows, and an extra length added to the auditorium. Now, Loxley School's auditorium was small, but we found that we could adapt it to the gymnasium needs. And basketball courts have a center line. And in Loxley School, like all the small ones, we adapted by having 2 center lines, or 3, of different colors, so that the forward court, you could drop back to the back line and have a full-size forward court, but a diminished back court. Then when you come in the other way, you could have a diminished back court and an enlarged forward court. And we found out we could do that. And those auditoriums served that need. These school buildings were built of brick, red brick. It had to be shipped in by railroad. It was very hard to build a brick building, a masonry building in those days if you didn't live near the railroad. The roofs were what we call slate, but they weren't slate. They were asbestos tile. And they were indestructible as far as the weather was concerned, but it was just impossible to keep them from leaking because of small cracks in the tile that got there by people going up there to fix another leak. Every time you fixed one leak, you created 2 or 3 more by crawling around on that tile. It was an art in walking on the tile. They're walking on the slate tiles, the asbestos tiles of those roofs. You had to walk where there was support, where they touched each other. The interiors of those buildings were painted white ceilings, cream-colored walls, and the wainscot was stained with a dark varnish. The floors were pine, and they were not quarter sawed, meaning that there was large grain exposed on those old floors, and frequently it would come loose, and great slabs of the floor would come up, leaving indentations in the floor. Like all school buildings in those days, you cared for floors by putting oil on them. I can still see the stenciling on those drums of oil. A school the size of Loxley would have a drum of oil delivered at the beginning of each school year. And that stenciling said it was Corvusol, C-O-R-V-U-S. I have no idea what that meant. I think it was just about like, it was a consistency of motor oil. And if you spread it on the floor twice a year, it really did keep down the dust. It was a really effective way. The health department just insisted. If they went into a school and found the large quantities of dust around, why, they told you to oil your floors. Those floors were later had plywood put over them and soft tile put over those, and I'm sure are still serving today. Paint in those days, those standard buildings were originally painted when they were built, but the county never had the force for a lot of years to repaint them, and they got into pretty bad shape. But the county would send you 6-gallon cans of white lead and oil, linseed oil, and you could mix your own paint, and then there were cans of color, and you could mix up your own color and paint your own classrooms. As a teacher, I painted many a classroom, especially at Loxley. The principal and I painted that entire building during the night from, say, 38 and 39. He and I personally painted the interior of that building. The windows were tall in those days, and could be adjusted from top and bottom, which gave you bring a top window down a little bit and your bottom window up a little bit, and you got some circulation in there. We adapted very well to the climate in those days. We didn't start our schools until after Labor Day, which gave you only a couple of weeks of hot weather. And we had only 7 and 8 month schools for elementary and junior high school. I think senior high schools by World War II had 9 grades. But in the middle 30s, even the senior high schools only had 8 grades, 8 months of school. So that we got in and out before the really hot weather hit us. The hallways on those buildings were enclosed. They were beautiful and functional buildings. They had the taste of Spanish architecture to the exterior. And I guess half of them that we had burned, maybe 3/4 of the wooden buildings that we had eventually burned during the years that I knew them. Fire was a real problem in those days. Lightning mostly, some arson, but mostly lightning. The oil on the floors was the application of that oil was generally the responsibility of the teacher. And the teacher would dismiss class 15 minutes early, and volunteers among the boys would take mops, which the county had in great abundance. Maybe I'll speak about the number of mops and brooms we had, but we had a great abundance of those. And they would apply this, they would go to the central supply for this, generally this 55-gallon drum of Corvusol, and they would put it in a 5-gallon bucket and come and pour it on the floor and use the mops to spread it in the last 15 minutes. And we'd do that on a Friday, and by Monday morning that oil would have been absorbed in the floor to the point that the discs could be put back in place, and we would be free of dust for a period of time. John Barks was principal of Loxley Elementary School after it had been reduced from junior high school status. It was not a full-time job at the time. John had other employment during the summertime, but he was at school preparing his school to receive children in a day or two. John noticed that outside under the eaves of the school there were numerous wasp nests. And being the good principal that he was, he determined that he was going to take care of those wasps before his children came. And he used the time-honored method of getting a long pole and wadding up a newspaper and taping it to the end of it, setting the newspaper on fire and holding it up and singeing the wings off these wasps. But what John didn't notice was that a little sparrow had built a nest in behind the service entrance to the school, where the wire came in from the power line and entered the school on the west side under the eaves. And that sparrow nest caught fire from the flames and went quickly inside the hole inside of the school building, and smoke began to pour out of the hole around the entrance wire. John didn't stop to call the fire department. He ran by the cafeteria and got himself a 2-gallon bucket, filled it with water, and rushed to the scuttle hole, the location of which he well knew. In all of those standard schools, the scuttle hole for the attic was always in one of the little side rooms immediately off the entrance. And you could get up to that hole with some cleats that were nailed onto the side of the wall. You'd climb up, you would push open that little scuttle hole and climb up through it. But the problem was that little hole was rather small. And John had a rather large girth about his midsection. But from the casual observer, you wouldn't believe that there was any way that John could have gotten up through that little hole. But he did, and quickly extinguished the fire. And when he was telling the story to his fellow principals a few days later, somebody said, "John, how on earth did you get yourself through that little hole?" "Boys," he said, "it was easy." He said, "All I did was thought of the prospect of driving to Bay Minette, climbing those stairs at the Board of Education office and going in and telling W. McGowan, 'Boss, I've just burned up one of your school buildings.'" Said, "I thought that, and I just went right through it."
The Wetzel Hill School itself was built on a piece of property where my house is now. I was aware that in my childhood that there had been a school there, but I didn't think too much about it. And then when I had children and my boys were playing outside, they kept bringing marbles in. And they didn't have any marbles. I didn't know where they were getting them from. So one day I said something to Miss Ellison, who was the postmistress at that time, about the boys finding the marbles. And she said, "Well, Tish, I went to school up there. There used to be a school on that property. And our boys traded marbles for candy or a penny or a nickel and played marbles a lot in school at that time. So evidently those marbles came from Wetzel Hill School. And then there were some other schools. I have a notebook where my daddy went to Pedro School, and it started out as a day book, and then he ended up writing diary type things in it. That school I knew was in the area. A school was, or some classes were held on the old potato shed. The school board evidently rented some rooms on the potato sheds, and they started some classes there early in the years. Then they had, the Lacey's had some school at their home because my father's sister had polio, but they didn't really know what it was. And he used to have to carry her on his back to school there because Papa wouldn't let him use the horse and the wagon. And my aunt always talked about Johnny carrying her to school. But Whistle Hill School was named after my grandparents. And they had, they had a little stagecoach stop there in the original home. They had at the railroad track, which is not there anymore, they had a Wetzel Hill whistle stop if anybody was there, because the children in Lower Baldwin County had to go to Baymonette to high school. And the children that were in high school in the Wetzel family walked to the railroad track, and if they saw them standing there, they stopped for them. So we have a Wetzel Hill School and a Wetzel Hill whistle stop. So, the building itself had holes in the roof, and I kept looking at them and wondering why. And I think my husband told me that was evidently to let the hot air out in the summertime. It was like maybe breeze could get in there, but that is why those holes were in the school, was let the hot air out. And that was a pretty good idea when you didn't have air conditioning, or fans probably. So, but it's unusual, it's unique looking. Wetzel Hill School, Pedro, and possibly the Lacey classes were consolidated into the original Loxley School. I'm not sure it was exactly where it is now, what we call Loxley School. I had heard a rumor that it was over on another block, but I'm not real sure. I don't really know. That's the only Loxley School I've ever known, is that one on the highway, Highway 59. I started school there in 1945 and graduated from the 9th grade in 1949 and went to Robertson.
I'm Rochelle Robinson, and I came here as a teacher in 1945. My husband had left the Navy as the war ended, and I came here as a teacher, and I was an 8th grade teacher, but I had done more in elementary school, so I taught 8th grade 1 year, and then I went to teaching 2nd grade in this school. Now, this school was not what it is today. We had coal heaters, and they were round with a metal jacket around them. And we had a janitor sometimes. I think we did all the time then. And they built the fires and kept us warm. But the school was far different from what it is now. And I taught here for 8 years and moved to Silver Hill from here, where I taught 1 year. And after that, I taught in Daphne for a number of years. Also, I was a student here as a child, so this school went through 9 grades, and I spent actually 17 years of my life here, so I'm pretty well acquainted with this school. But I know that as a child, I was afraid of cattle, and so if there were cows on the street, I would walk a block to get away from the cattle. I was very afraid of them. I don't think they would have bothered me, but I didn't know that, so I shied away from them. I suppose any little kid would do that. But we all walked to school in those days, except the children who didn't live in town. They rode buses. And when I was a child, there were no school cafeterias. The kids who lived in town went home for lunch, and those who didn't live in town brought their lunches. They would eat in the room or out on the playground, didn't matter. Also, we played basketball a lot outdoors. We had a goal outside. We had an old school bell. It was a large metal school bell, and it used to ring. Mr. Huff was the first principal that I remember at this school. And then Mr. Hadley came. He was our principal. And I think that we just had 2 the whole time I was a student here. And while I was a teacher here, I guess Mr. Gates was the only principal. Yeah, he was. He was the only principal we had. I'm looking at a yearbook from some years ago, and Robert Gates was principal, and we had 10 teachers. No assistant principal, just 10 teachers. There were 9 grades here, 1 through 9. And the teachers I'm looking at are Lillian Smith, Edna Redding, Ms. Lee Croy, I can't think of her first name, Delia Dean, I can't think of her married name, Freddie Yinch, Charles McNeil, Jean Yinch, Nandine Cooper, myself, and Elmeda Ellis. Those were the teachers, 1 through 9. We had no air conditioning when I was a child attending this school, and very limited electricity. Actually, there weren't many lights as a child. They had lights in the hallways and the auditorium, but the classrooms were not well lit. And then when I came back as a teacher, there was still no air conditioning. And I never taught one day in my life in an air-conditioned room because I retired before it was generally done. Never spent one day in an air-conditioned classroom, except as a college student. There just wasn't that luxury then, and we suffered. It was hot, and you had an overhead fan later years, and papers, you know, would fly everywhere. It was a mess. But we lived. We made it.